Hello, I am your everyday average Jonathan. Join me this week while I take this and turn it into this, what is called an Ulu knife. Hello, I am your everyday average Jonathan. I'm an ordinary guy with ordinary tools making extraordinary items. I am a self-taught craftsman. I'm an amateur blacksmith and a novice woodworker. Each week I take on new projects. I take on eccentric builds, whimsical builds, items and things that draw forth the imagination, at least in me. And at the same time, I also try to take maybe ordinary everyday items and take a new twist on them, reverse engineer them, learn about what it is that the original craftsmen might have intended in building them. And that is certainly going to be true this week. This week I'm going to make an Ulu knife. An Ulu knife is something that is traditional to the natives who inhabited and inhabit the Aleutian Islands and the coastal regions of Alaska and Canada. While it's certainly not a household item, it may look like some things that you may already have in your kitchen. So without further ado, let's get to the shop and get started. The ulu is a tribal knife used by the Alaskan coastal tribes, by the Aleuts and the Inuits primarily, and there's some other tribes that used it. It had 4 distinct styles, but basically all of the styles had a semi-curved to flat blade that would protrude off of the bottom, and it was often referred to as the woman's knife. It was used for cutting hair, cutting hide, doing sort of utility work. It was also used a lot in food preparation of different sorts. Oftentimes it would have a bone or stone or metal handle attached to it. It reminds me a lot of the culinary knives that I have seen where they're used to chop up herbs and other vegetables. But the earliest known Ulu knife that has been found is dated back to 2,500 years BC. So it's a very old knife, it's been around a long time. I was very interested to ply my trade and see what sort of take I could have on this. So I selected the most beat up, corroded piece of metal that I had in my entire shop for it. It's really pitted, it's really rotten, and I also selected the tried and true method that the ancients would have used to remove that gunk, which is just to throw the metal around right and left. Then I used the other method that the ancients would have used, which is plug in ye old angle grinder and just abrade and abrade and abrade it. I'm pretty content with that. I feel like I honored the ancients. After cutting out the template and looking at it, I felt like it needed some tweaks before I cut it out. And then, I wish I could forge better. I wish that I could take this and actually hammer some of these shapes out better. I'm just not that good. So a lot of cutting, a lot of grinding was to ensue. The profile is a good profile. I'm happy with that, but there's just a lot of cutting into raw metal to get this done. This knife is going to have a center hole, which your forefinger can go into. So as I've done many times before, I just drill it out, and with that step down bit, I'm just going to bore it out. At the same time, I'm going to bevel the edges so it has this rounded feel. And then I'm going to start just profiling and cutting in and then honing the edge. This came out good. The edge still needs to be sharpened here. I was going to heat treat it, but it turned out well. Now, applying the artist touch mark, I didn't want to do too much heating of the overall metal before I heat treat it, but this torch will let me get a spot heated, and then I will go ahead and apply the artist touch mark. I wish I was trustworthy enough of myself to do my touch mark with 1 hammer blow, but it usually takes at least 2, sometimes 3, for me to get it in there. Now it's time to heat treat this. I was just going to go ahead and heat up the edge, and I'm going to try and do this as best I can the correct way. So I'm going to use oil, and then this magnet that you see me using there, I'm going to get this red hot, apply the magnet. Once it's lost its magnetic properties, I'm going to go ahead and dip this in the oil, move it fore and aft, and go ahead and let it cool in the oil. I have no idea what type of steel that sheet of metal that I selected is. I do think it's pretty decent steel, but we're going to find out. Now, this purple piece of wood, I've used this many times in some of my other builds. It's called tiger maple, and it is truly that color. That is the color of the wood. It's an exotic wood. It's a very dense, very hard wood. I have some of it still on hand, so it's what I go to when it's something like a handle. I was thinking about doing this in laminated, layered pieces of other types of wood, but I'm just going to do this out of a what I would call monolithic piece of tiger maple. Last piece here, I'm going to go ahead and hone the edge, get it very, very sharp, and I'm going to use this compound to get it to the last piece of sharpness that I need it to be. This electro sharpening tool really does a good job for me. It gets what I bevel out and removes the imperfections, and then it has varying grades of sandpaper for its belts, so I can get it very smooth. And as you can see here, it is pretty darn sharp. Time to glue the handle on. Ye old epoxy from 3M. I'm sure the ancients were aware that 3M was going to be the thing. And just come in here and sandwich these together. I will come back in the next day in 24 hours, and I will go ahead and start to profile these with the sanding belt and the die grinder. Okay, next morning came back out. All that's left is to just profile this and get the tiger maple down to a sanded surface and a beveled surface. And then I'm going to put a little bit of polyacrylic on it. I'm sure it's not food safe, but at the same time, it's just a nice addition. I also put some copper scales, what are called scales. They're basically pins in the handle. And I'm just going to try this out. Chop up some sage from the garden. It is interesting to actually put it to use, because normally I just send these things somewhere to someone, but I think I'll hold on to this for a little bit. I like how this turned out. I like the look. It didn't have the design that I was quite looking for, but all in all, I'm happy with it. Well, thank you for joining me for this build. This was a very, very simple, very, very straightforward build. There's not a lot to say about it. It functions, it works, it's sharp. Whenever I make something that is different, is similar to the Japanese Kiridashi that I made, where it is something that is from another culture for a different use or a different type of use case, I do get a lot out of that. It's fun to take a stab at it. But honestly, there are such good knife makers out there right now. I mean, there's so many incredibly good, incredibly artistic, and incredibly talented knife makers that this is, in the pantheon of knife makers, this is like a D+ at best. There's no real learnings or real takeaways. This is so straightforward, but my final grade for this in terms of execution, I give myself a B+ on that. In terms of style, and just what it turned out to be, I'm just kind of like, just kind of bored with it. It's not all that great if you ask me, but who knows, it's probably going to become a gift for somebody, and I may actually try to use it around the house or in the kitchen. If you enjoy builds like this though, that are explorations into devices, implements, tools, weapons, purely for the sake of that exploration, purely for the sake of an artistic recreation, please check out my channel for other builds where I take on projects like this. Regardless, thank you for joining me. Join me next week. I'm going to begin to restore an old church pew that someone just gave me, a solid oak church pew from God knows where and what time period. Until then, God bless. Have a great week.